All right, good evening, everyone, or rather, good afternoon. But I don't know because I haven't had my lunch yet, so I'm a bit confused. This session is going to be about Europe seen from the periphery. And in order to do that, and that this periphery is as important to Europe as the geographical heart of the EU. So this conversation is about something crucial for the stability, for the progress of Europe as a whole. In order to do that, we have two great speakers with us today. Alex Soros, the chair of the Open Society Foundations, and to his left, Ivan Krastev, chairman of the board, Center for Liberal Strategies. Welcome to this dialogue. So let me start with Ukraine. And let me start with you, Alex, since you just spent 48 hours in Kiev. Europe will need to sustain financial and defense commitments vis-à-vis Ukraine security, and thus for the foreseeable future. So what impact will this have on the EU?
Easy question. Easy question. Look, I mean, I think the extent to which Ukraine is already having an impact on the EU is there. I mean, a lot of what, I mean, I was, had the, privilege of being able to speak to President Macron last night, and he said, essentially, we are at war without sending a soldier to war. And I think, this is obviously the mentality, certainly of a lot of people in government, but I'm not sure that's also reflected in public opinion, particularly in a lot of, the Western, and southern countries. But, and we're talking about, periphery, but I think it's also important that we understand where the core of Europe is. After Kiev, I went to Warsaw, and people there expect under a Prime Minister Tusk that the focus of Europe, maybe it will be Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw, or it will just be Berlin and Warsaw. But they really believe that, with a credible foreign policy and with Tusk's history, that they can speak on behalf of Europe. And I think that this will completely change the dynamic within the European Union. The only other point I will make is I think it's how do we disentangle, or it's a question really, the fact for deterrence, security guarantees for Ukraine, NATO membership, and then what does Europe have to give on top of that? I think that may become more important if Donald Trump gets elected. But I'll say this, and I'm not trying to be controversial, but I think if the Ukraine conflict has shown anything, it has shown how reliant Europe is on the U.S. and the U.S.-based security umbrella. I think we talk a lot about European unity, but unity and strength are not the same thing. And I must say, I think Europe looks very weak right now, very dependent on the U.S. I mean, having to wait for Biden in order to make a statement on call for a ceasefire and to do things on Israel-Palestine. But in a way, having your friends in office and having a European president in the United States, part of me actually feels that, at least on a rhetorical level, Europe, in some respects, and European foreign policy, particularly if you look at somewhere like the Western Balkans, was actually stronger when Biden wasn't the president and when Trump was the president, because Europe actually had to start doing things together. Now, the unity is great. The transatlantic unity is great. We don't want that. We don't want that. We don't want that to stop. But I think there's a point at which, when you look at this, Europe itself is becoming the periphery, all of Europe.
Of course, periphery always in the geographical sense. Let's say, Ivan, can the EU sustain, can the political Europe sustain a long war in Ukraine?
So I'm coming from the periphery, nevertheless, where the center is. So from this point of view, at least, I'm very fit for the panel. But listen, it's a great question. And one of the interesting stories, and there is a lot of polling, and some of the polling that ECFR did is going to be published in 2 or 3 days, is the paradox of this war is that seen from outside of the West is in a war with Russia. The only people who do not are ready to recognize this is us, and particularly the Americans. And I'm saying this because when you're in a war, it's very important to know what is a victory and what is a defeat. And by the way, even you can be much more ambiguous about what is a victory, but you should have a very clear idea of what is a defeat. And part of the story is the narrative itself, because you said political unities. This was an identity crisis for the EU when it all this started. The 3 major assumptions on which European security have been built have been questioned overnight. First, that a major war is not possible on the old continent anymore. And listen, this is a major war. The number of shells that are fired today in the Russian-Ukrainian war is on the level of the 1943. This is not a military conflict. This is 2 big countries, one of them major nuclear power. The second thing that basically was very much challenged was that economic interdependency is enough to secure peace. And listen, Europeans and particularly Germans had the good reasons to believe that it works, because it worked for a long time. It worked with Germany, it worked with Western Europe, and suddenly it didn't work with Russia. I always believed that Nord Stream 2 was much more of a security project than a commercial project, and it didn't work. And then, after 2003, Europeans we decided that military power doesn't really matter much because Americans were so powerful, so what did they achieve? And then you understand that military power doesn't matter when you don't have it. And this is the dependency Alex was talking about. When the war started, Ukraine has ammunition for 6 weeks, Germany for 2 days. And thirdly, which in my view is also critically important, what we see with the Russian-Ukrainian war is that nationalism matters. Listen, in a positive sense. Nationalist mobilization in Ukraine is critically important to explain how they managed to sustain resistance for 600 days, basically facing a country which is much more powerful, much bigger, with a much more military history. I'm saying all this because when you're saying about political unity, for me, the most important is to frame the narrative right. And for me, the right narrative is Russia lost the war they started on February 22nd. They lost it already when they went on mobilization, because President Putin was not lying. It was not meant to be a war. It was meant to be a special operation. And this special operation had to finish in several weeks, and the idea was to have a Russia-dominated Ukrainian policy in one version or the other. This is not going to happen. So now we have a different war, and we have a different war objective on the Russian side. And the war objective is to show that Russia is not going to dominate Ukraine, but Ukraine is going to be a failed state. And listen, the level of infrastructural destruction in Ukraine is incredible. There are cities, for example, Bakhmut, 92% of the buildings have been hurt. So the story is how you're fighting this one. And in my view, you're fighting this one if you're going to say we're going to treat Ukraine in the West, the Western community was treating West Germany in the late 1940s. There is no talk about post-war reconstruction because we don't have a clue when the war is going to end up. And what is the end of the war going to mean? So the problem is that we should try to create this conditions under which Ukraine will be able to produce and basically to have economic and political life and prepare for a longer war, because in my view, the biggest, and I'm going to end up with this, the biggest threat to Ukraine is demographic exodus. People leaving the country, people not coming back. And I'm coming from the West, from the Balkans. I have seen what happened in Bosnia. If there are not going to be air defenses that allows certain type of productions to be functioning already in Ukraine, building factories in which you are not afraid that they are going to be bombed the next day, these people are not going to come back. And they're not going to come back because the kids are going to be in school, because there is, for many of them, no place to go back. And I'm saying this because we don't know much what is happening in Russia, but to be honest, we don't know much what is happening in Ukraine. And people are exhausted. There is a major tensions between those who are on the front and those who are not. There are tensions between those who are outside of the country and those who are inside of the country. For 2 years, this is a major, major pressure on the society. So unless we're going to change the narrative and said, listen, we understand what is going on, we start to integrating it step by step, knowing that the war is not going to basically finish tomorrow, not believing that there's going to be a fast victory. And honestly speaking, even if Ukraine succeeds to liberate all of its territories to the borders of 1991, it does not mean the end of the war. Are they going to go to attack Moscow? So from this point of view, I do believe that if we're not going to be very clear what we understand is the risk and what we understand is victory and defeat, we're in a position in which our political unity is going to be sustained, but from outside, people are going to have the feeling that Ukraine is losing and that Europe is losing.
Thank you, Ivan. Of course, making Ukraine this national entity that has not failed is what enlargement of the EU is about, what accession of the EU is about. Yeah. Should Ukraine become a member of the EU? And if so, how do we do that?
I mean, I, of course, support that. It's called Euromaidan, for a reason. I think, one of the reasons, why, Vladimir Putin saw Ukraine as an existential threat was here as a country that had, considerable approval towards Russia, and after independence, shift and want to become part of the European community. Obviously now with the war and with what's going on also with the Polish economy, the center of Europe has moved eastward. As I sort of as I alluded to earlier, but this process, unless there's real political will, and as we've seen with the Western Balkans, waiting in the waiting room, except if your country's Catholic, for now since just the start of the 2000s, this process will take a very long time, and who knows when that the same anti-European sentiment we see, or fatigue with Europe we see, and lack of credibility, happens in Ukraine. And this is something that I warn them about, because I believe that we're setting up expectations that they think that they're going to be in the European Union in the next few years. And that's not going to be the case. And obviously, when it comes to a lot of things, they're not ready. But as a core principle, and for the things that the Open Society Foundations have believed in from the start of of our work in Ukraine and the Western Balkans and all of Eastern Europe. It was always about European integration as the key for for the post-Soviet transition. But I wanted to come back to one thing, and because I didn't really answer it the first time about, and Ivan really hit it, which is Ukraine right now, to me, and what I saw, and in speaking to people, has become hostage to its own rhetoric. And I don't think that a lot of European countries in the Eastern Europe who have certain histories with Russia have been very helpful. I don't believe Ukraine can go to negotiations because there's nobody to negotiate with. I don't believe that Putin wants to negotiate. So this has nothing to do with negotiations. But if you were to say, on the day of Putin's attack on Kiev, that Ukraine would repel this, that they would take back 50% of their territory, that they would have opening of chapters with Europe, that they would stay as a sovereign state, and that they would show the world that Russia is not this great military power, that is a victory. And and I tried to say this to every interlocutor in Kiev, because I believe that they have put the bar of victory too high, and everything is about there is a dialectic of victory and defeat. And if anything, if I can be so candid, we need to help our Ukrainian friends really see victory as what is achievable in in the art of the possible, and not meaning that somehow victory means Russia will dissolve tomorrow. And how we get there is going to be is I think going to be a challenge.
Thank you, Ivan. How should the EU approach enlargement? Ukraine, but also the part of enlargement that was already there, the Western Balkans. What's the right way?
First, I do believe that the word enlargement this time is totally misleading. It's about the remaking of the EU. You're not going to integrate the Ukraine the way you integrated Bulgaria or Romania. The situation has changed. When the enlargement started, the assumption was that European Union is going to transform its neighborhood. Now fear is that the neighborhood is going to transform the European Union. And from this point of view, we should, in my view, be kind of much more precise that we're talking about something totally different. And this is that there is a geopolitical Europe, and how this geopolitical Europe is going to fit the European Union institutionally. Obviously, two things has happened. Alex was talking about the waiting room. The waiting room now is the emergency room. You don't want to wait in Moldova. You don't want to wait in the Western Balkans. In the previous enlargement, the question was, we don't know when it is going to happen, but we know what is going to happen. And now when is the question for everybody. And from this point of view, certain things are already happening. By the way, the Ukrainians are traveling in Europe. They have the right to work. So in my view, the most important is that you start to integrate certain sectors as fast as possible, because honestly speaking, this is also the only way for the Ukraine not to be a failed state. You cannot expect that basically they're going to sustain itself and just go. Of course, there are going to be trade-offs. And trade-offs is how exactly you're monitoring the money that you're sending to your country that is bombed every day, coming from Bulgaria, and we know something about getting European funds. Believe me, you can justify any money disappearing with the idea that the building was bombed yesterday. So from this point of view, I do believe this is why the language of a normal enlargement for me does not make sense. This is an extraordinary situation. Ukraine should start to be integrated as soon as possible, and that is the only way. By the way, this is the normal way of new state building there. There are certain things on which European Union should be serious, and there are other things in which you should not allow your own bureaucratic nature to become the biggest problem for the process. And thirdly, geopolitical also tries to mean that you're thinking in security terms. Now, probably, Ukraine has one of the best armies in Europe. I don't want to offend anybody else. But from this point of view, this is already something different. Also, probably, if we're going to be able to do it, they're going to have one of the strongest defense industries, because they're going to produce their own ammunition. They don't want every day to go and to beg somebody to give them shells here and there. And this is how the enlargement goes. And then you go allowing on the market. There are going to be issues more difficult than others, starting with the agriculture. But it is not going to be solved on the day when they enter the European Union. This is not about the end day. And I do believe this is true also for the Western Balkans. But it means that you should change this time not simply Kiev, but also Brussels. Because it is not going to be business as usual. And for me, this is why the word enlargement suggests that you're going to have the same way it worked before. It cannot be worked before. This is a country in a war. And as a result of it, probably Alex said that basically Ukraine can become the hostage of their rhetoric, and I'm very much supportive of this. European Union also can become a hostage of its rhetoric. We always try to pretend that everything is normal, everything is under control. And this is not also how people feel about it, particularly some of the countries which are closer to the conflict. So probably starting talking differently and acting differently is not going to hurt us.
Thank you. Brief question before we open it to the audience. Alex, you spend a fair amount of your time in the US. What if Trump comes back? What does this mean?
I think Trump has made it pretty clear what he's going to try to do. He'll go to Putin and he'll, try to make a deal. What Ukraine then does, I think, is a question. But I would just say that, Trump won. There was an element of surprise. He didn't even think he was going to win. I mean, he told his, wife on election night, "Baby, we've been told we're not going to win." And, so that's why there was so much dysfunction. But he knows, and we've seen this with Orban in Hungary, he knows what he wants to do, and he's saying what he's going to do. And NATO and the U.S. umbrella and what happens with Europe, because he has more animus for Germany than he does for China, and I think he's made that pretty clear. I worry, in some respects, I worry more about Europe in a Trump, presidency than the United States, partly because of our federal system. Even though I think he's going to go through with some pretty awful things, there too, and maybe I'll be in prison. But it's
never joke on a panel. Because jokes can become a reality.
It wasn't a joke. No, because the U.S. will be he'll go after all of his political enemies. He's making it pretty clear, and he has a whole plan there that's being, that's being put there by the Heritage Foundation as well, and other people there. So, it's the fate of the world of so much is going to be up on election day this time next year.
Ivan, what if the populists take the upper hand in Europe, and there's a fair amount of elections next year?
This was my point. We don't know who's going to win where, but it's very important to understand that 2024 is going to be one of these pivotal years in which many things are going to change. And by the way, 2024 already started with the Polish elections, which ended up well. But the story is, in these 18 months, from September till the moment new American president is going to go in office, 4 billion people are going to vote in the world. And many of these elections are going to be really critical. For example, we all talk for sure about American elections, but there are going to be elections in Taiwan, presidential elections. And the way they go, the rhetoric, can very much change the dynamics of the China-American relations and basically Chinese calculations. We have European elections, not the most important elections, but by the way, the elections in which always the protest parties, populist parties are overperforming. So can change the mood of the continent. And you have India, you have Mexico, you have Indonesia. By the way, Russian elections, with respect to the war. Okay, we know who is going to win. But on the other side, because of the fact that you have an elections, this is also probably going to affect the military strategy of the Russian Federation. Ukraine, are they going to be elections? Not going to elections. By the way, both of them is going to have a cost. And I'm saying all this because we're really in a period in which this combination of a war and in sometimes elections which are as important as war can remake the world in such a short period that when we're going basically to discuss in the next peace forum what has happened, we're going to believe that all the conversation that we have today was the conversation from a very distant past.
All right, 2 questions from the audience. This gentleman over here, can someone give him a mic?
That would be nice. Thank you so much for very interesting interventions. I really enjoyed. I'm Łukasz Jurczyszyn from the Polish Embassy here in Paris, former think tanker from the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Well, I have one question. Look at that, this how war in Ukraine provoked by Russia, how it dominated the panel also says something. It's a really turning point. And maybe one comment regarding the numbers.
No,
you said
a question.
Yeah, just one number that, almost 17 million Ukrainians crossed our border, maybe 3 million stayed, but that's a really, really huge number, and you're absolutely right. But the question is what to do, namely what you mentioned, to avoid this peripherization of Europe. Is this institutional changes will be enough, ramping up security spendings? Because with Ukraine, we had this unity. But when we look at this war in the Middle East, with Israel, with Palestine, it will be more complicated to gain this unity. How to avoid this peripherization? How we should dialoguing with the so-called global South?
Thank you. And let me take another question. The lady at the back. Lady, this one. You.
Thank you. Ina Berezkina, School of Civic Education. A very simple question. If Europe is becoming the periphery, where do you see the center then?
Good. All right, Alex.
So to answer the first question, the center being is new. I mean, it would be U.S.-China competition, but also what some, including Ivan, have referred to as the middle powers. Turkey, Brazil, Indonesia, etc. India. I mean, for example, where economy grows, etc., and where there are a lot more people. So I think that when you look at where power now lies, it's perhaps more distributed. On the question of institutional reforms, I mean, I think even right now the EU has within it the capability to reform itself. You can have an escalade to an escalade to an escalade. I mean, it's done it before. It's not a question of, what think tank is going to have the best paper about how Europe will reform its, accession process and the way that it conducts itself, or whether the Franco-German proposal is the best or the Austrian proposal is the best. It's a question of political will. It's a question of leadership and political will, and that's that's the hardest thing to plan for. Obviously, I don't know how to supplement for political will.
Thank you, Alex. Ivan?
Yeah, there was a famous Native American tribe which have this kind of a stone, and anywhere they go, they put it, and they said that this is the center of the world. We can go this way, but the other is very much the fact that when we said that there is a crisis of post-Cold War international order, this is a risk, but many countries see it as an opportunity. This is why I never believed when somebody is telling me that countries are sitting on the fence. Do you believe that Erdogan is sitting? He's running all the time. All these countries are going to be hyperactive. Some of them in a very different direction. This is not an alliance. But they're going to try not to be interested about the state of the world, but interested in their place in the world. And from this point of view for Europe, the biggest challenge is we still think in terms of order, while others are very much interested in adjusting to this order. And this is putting European Union in a difficult position. And on the Polish question, I do believe that Poland has a role to play. By the way, Poland already played a very important role during the war, and nobody can understand what happened in Ukraine if not understanding what it means that in certain period, 8% of the Polish population have been basically hosting Ukrainian refugees. But something different is happening in Poland. Previous government was very much interested not to allow European Union to do this or that. Now, for the first time, the head of Eastern European biggest state is going to be a politician that knows European Union well, because he has been serving on the top. And for the first time, Poland, in my view, really has an opportunity to partner with Germany and France. And honestly speaking, the Germany and France has proved that they need a third man. Yeah. And when the United Kingdom left, they can function only in this kind of much more liberal understanding of the marriage couple. So you really can have a different story, and because these countries also present a very different sensitivity about the security threat. And I'm just going to end up with one result of the polling. 6 months after the war started, we have been asking people in different countries what they fear. In Poland and the Baltic republics, they feared occupation. In Germany and France, they feared a nuclear war. So you need this kind of a renegotiations of fears in order to make geopolitical Europe's work. So it's up to the polls.
All right. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of the session. I would suggest that in addition to Germany and France, Poland puts around the table Spain and Italy, mostly because given the state of affairs in Europe, it would give a bit of ballast. So the conclusion of this session is pretty simple. 2024, fasten your seatbelts. Don't buy popcorn and Coca-Cola because it's going to be too turbulent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Ivan.
Thank you.
Applause to that.